Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Spider-Man 3. Going through this movie this time around, because it's been such a long time since I've watched this movie kind of hits me differently. There's a lot of times where there's a lot of line delivery in this film where I'm like, man, that's so cringe. Like certain way that people are delivering things, I'm just like, I was like, during this film. But besides that, besides the cringe moments, the thing that I think makes up so much for this movie is just like, man, I want more Spider-Man black suit scenes. Give me more of those. Just give me some more of that, please. Man, did I just enjoy the black suit being put into this film. Still to this day, the best part of this movie is just Tobey Maguire in this black suit. I don't care if eventually people make jokes about it and call it like emo Spider-Man or whatever, but man, was this such a good part of the movie that if nothing else holds up, then Black Suit Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire, is just the best thing about this movie. And if we were to ever get a No Way Home scenario, it would be interesting to kind of revisit that. Just like, hey, what if, like, Tobey Maguire just kept the black suit? What would have happened, you know? Like, kept it for another film to have us have a different Venom character, maybe in the MCU, because who knows where Tobey's character is exactly going to go after No Way Home, if there even is a Tobey in Nowhere Home, which I don't know. Maybe it might be an end credit thing, is what I'm assuming. So I just remember the promos of this where we had like Doritos, I think at the time, was doing like choose between red and black. Like, and it was all about like choosing a side, like as if this is like bizarrely some kind of Twilight thing. I'm like, no, it's the same person in two different costumes, but like you have this goody two shoes Peter Parker that's during Mary Jane's dumping of him, and then you have emo Peter Parker that is gonna be like, I'm gonna put dirt in your eye. You want forgiveness? Find religion. There's something about that feels a little similar. Anyway, yeah, I had so much fun with this movie. I don't care that it like we have to drudge through the whole like get on up. there like there's some cringe parts, but there's also just funny parts that you can just take this movie and enjoy it for what it is. Plus, also, there's some pretty decent villains in this movie. You get Green Goblin, you get freaking Sandman, Flint Marko, and you get Venom towards the end of this movie. Spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen this in forever. Because if you have Eddie Brock in this film, who is now a different Eddie Brock that's in a different world, that to each their own. So, going in here, I thoroughly enjoyed this, even though it was cringe. So, how would I grade this? Like, I don't know, it really has this kind of like 50-50 kind of feel to me, weirdly enough. Like, it should be better than all the other ones, but it just kind of it just like, there's several lines that I'm just like, ugh, but like, there's also this other part where like the action is just so freaking good, like just heads and tails above of any of the other movies, like as far as action stuff goes. So it's just like a bad story, but it's just such good action. Just a lot of like, I think when I watched this the very first time in theaters, like I couldn't tell the difference between the CGI Spider-Man and the actual Spider-Man. I'm like, man, this is so crisp and seamless. I'm like, oh, what a beauty this movie is while I was watching it. But like, I think there might have been a spot maybe here and there, like especially when you have uh Toby unmasked. I think that's right around like when like we're towards the end of the movie where Toby is swinging in with Mary Jane. I think that is a part where you can kind of tell. But like this movie for the most point is just seamless. But people could go back and like, no, I see this. Oh no, I like. But I was like, the first time I saw this, it's like, man, this movie is just, it's great. It was hands down such a great movie. Now looking back on it, I'm like, you knew this was coming, Pete. You knew this was coming. Then eventually you're gonna go back into this and just be like, ah, ah, ah. So let's go out of our way to say that we've seen this film because we have. Let's go into spoilers about this. Let's get into that double five because otherwise, that time again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil this movie. Beginning of the film is again another opening sequence, another crawl of credits and whoever letting us know who the frickin' people are in this movie as if we weren't aware. What are the credits for anymore? Beginning part of the movie is to roll out this scene of Spider-Man flipping away. And we're to naturally assume, oh, that's actually Tobey Maguire just flipping it out. But instead it's just some billboard showing Spider-Man consistently just swinging everywhere. Like, I guess to confuse the villains to think like, oh no, Spider-Man is here. I'm like, oh no, it's a billboard. God dang. I was going to do some crime, but then all of a sudden I got a little confused. I thought Spider-Man was here, but then billboard. Oh, well, let's go and do some crime then. Tobey Maguire is surrounded by kids. Peter Parker is surrounded by kids. All of a sudden they are starting to leave. Peter's just like, well, wait a minute. Like, it'll start up again in another couple minutes. And like, yeah. Like, it's not the actual thing. Because the kids, I guess, got confused as well. They thought it was legit Spider-Man. So, Spider-Man or Peter is to tell us, like, give us a heads up about what his life is like now. Kind of like in a familiar territory of the intro of the very first movie where Peter's like, hey, I'm your friendly neighborhood. Well, you know. You know, title screen. Come on. Toby tells us he is to be so good at being Spider-Man that it seems like he actually has time for things now. He actually has time to be able to go to class and have every single person be throwing spitballs and blinding him, forcing him to raise his hand even though he doesn't have a thing to answer with. Gwen Stacy is in this movie and a big thumbs up. The girl, I believe, who ended up playing Gwen Stacy in this movie was actually pregnant during the filming of this film, from what I remember. Because I think the girl who played Gwen Stacy, she's like, yeah, I'm doing an action movie, and I'm like, I'm pregnant. Like, this is weird. And then when looking back on it, I'm like, I guess you could probably tell. Like, but why is she doing action sequences when baby? Maybe I was wrong about that, but like, I don't know. I'm sure there's probably an interview out there somewhere with the girl who plays Gwen Stacy. I don't remember what the actress's name. She's the girl that ended up being in Jurassic World and all kinds of bajillion of other things. So Peter, doing class, Gwen Stacy's answering questions. She's the smart Gwen Stacy. She's not just a model. She has brains also. She's not just good looking. So But yeah, so everyone's bullying Peter in class. Transition on to Peter also wanting to, of course, get engaged with Mary Jane. It seems like the right time. Uh, because Peter is also to go to her plays and mimic every single word that she used to say, like, like Godzilla style in it. And I'm like, that is so cringe. That is such a cringe thing to do. Like, maybe he's seen the plays like 500 times. He must have. Um, and so she's singing it, and he's like, all of a sudden, Harry is like watching over Peter. He's like, I'm going to get you. I'm going to go and do the same exact experiment that my father did coincidentally, because who was really there to have the knowledge of putting together all this stuff? I guess Harry does now. So Harry's going to go and put himself in the same experiment that his father did, so that way he can get Green Goblin powers, because they kind of set that up in the last film. So but Peter is also going to try and get a wedding ring. Coincidentally, there's to be a wedding ring that's on layaway. Man, that's got to be heartbreaking. It's like, hey, yeah, like hopefully you can have all the payments for this ring, because it's on layaway. Like, but luckily, Aunt May comes in a pinch, if you know what I mean. But so let's get this right. So Harry at the thing at the play, and so Peter is to go and confront Harry because he spots him, and they have another argument where Peter is just like, hey, like, I thought we could still be friends and all kinds of things. Harry's like, no, like, you killed my father. Like, I'm still gonna seek my revenge. Like, this isn't over, Peter. So, like, and I'm paraphrasing a lot. That'll happen throughout here. I'm gonna try to get some of the lines correct, but eventually, like, paraphrasing will be had because there's a lot to unpack in this review. So Peter and Mary Jane are to be watching the comments or comments. Hey, if you want to comment now, watching the stars go by, or comments or something. Some stars of watching is going on here. Peter and Mary Jane are laying on the spider web, and no one comes up with a conclusion because they're nowhere nearby. It's just like, hey, that guy must be Spider-Man. Like, let's have a video of whatever he's doing, so that way, like, I can send this in to J. Jonah Jameson, and J. Jonah Jameson will be like, Peter Parker, Spider-Man. I knew it. He's a menace. So, how we conveniently come up with the whole Venom thing in this movie, or the whole symbiote thing in this movie. Like, Dr. Connors has to come up with the word symbiote in this film. I'm like, did he just come up with that out of nowhere, or is that an actual term of science that they, like, came up with in science before coming into comic book? Or did they just freaking, like, it has to, I guess, just be a symbiote, or a symbiote, or a whatever. Anyways, so there is to be a thing of space that falls down into the sky, which is to be a star, a comet, or something. A comet, I'm assessing or assuming, crashes down to Earth, and all of a sudden, like, we have the symbiote making its way weirdly weird. Like, the whole symbiote thing just looks kind of just like a spider crawling on someone's face in this movie, but I think that actually makes sense with what eventually happens. Is Like we have like seemingly a thing that looks like a spider that is attacking somebody and making them symbiote or symbiote. The symbiote goes and latches onto Peter Parker's bike because I guess it assumes that this is the perfect specimen to be symbiote. They couldn't have picked Mary Jane, who is also on the bike as well. This movie could have drastically changed. It could have been like Peter versus Mary Jane, and we could have had that fight out. That would have been pretty sweet, right? Just be like lovers all of a sudden at odds with one another because all of a sudden we get emo Mary Jane. So, but now we also have to transition to a villain in this movie. So we have this thing that I don't quite understand about the origin story of this character because I think there was probably a better way to write this all in one fell swoop, and they kind of go this in a very but backwards way of doing things. So Flint Marko is to escape from prison and make his way back home. And like this guy can easily just sneak into this house, go and look at his sick daughter, which is just sad. I don't quite remember what her problem was. Like, what is her problem? Like, what beef did she have with anybody? Did she have like a heart condition or something like that? I don't remember exactly what it was, but I guess it really doesn't matter. Like, oh, well, the comic book said at one point in time that she had this going on, or oh, the movie said that she has this. Like, okay, all right. So Flint is to just make his way through the house, putting on probably his wife's clothes because why would Flint's wife still have all of his clothes? Like I think he's putting on his wife's clothes and just like hey man, like I can't find anything, so I'm just gonna put on your clothes if that's okay. Flint goes and gets a thing of bread, and that's what wakes up his wife. Not the whole getting of the clothes thing. No. Like, immediately once he starts ripping a thing of bread in half, like, his wife is like, I smell ripping of bread. So, now Flint and his wife are having this argument about things, and that is to awaken his child. So, Flint is to talk to his kid, but really, Flint's wife wants nothing to do with him because she knows that eventually he's just going to go back to a life of crime anyways. Because that's just who he is. So, which is kind of inevitable. So, Clint is to go off, and I'm not doing this in the perfect way of the film. Clint is to eventually go off and eventually get chased down by these police officers and these dogs for him to have to like run and jump over this barbed wire fence, bizarrely fall into this one experimental like thing that they have going on with sand, bizarrely, and like this circular like experimental whatever the heck thing that it is in this thing that creates Sandman to be Sandman, coincidentally by the place of which that they are doing things. Here's the thing that I have a problem with. One, why couldn't the prison that Flint Marko was in be doing this experiment so that way once Flint Marko is Sandman, that's how he escapes from prison? Wow, wouldn't that have been a very interesting thing to do? Instead of escape from prison to eventually be chased by a lot of prison guards anyways with dogs. This makes no sense to me. You would have, like, this just feels cut weird. Like, they, like, were trying to figure things out. And I know a lot of people will press this question. Well, how is it that he gets his clothes then? that he has for the rest of the movie on. Well, here's how to explain that. Flint Marko could have been in prison and had the plan of escaping, and so maybe he could have either paid someone off or snuck into whatever the room is that has everyone's clothes, taken those, and then that's when he makes his escape. That's when he jumps that fence. That's when he has this experiment being done on him that turns him into this Sandman person. But maybe that's just that maybe just sounds dumb, or maybe that just, I don't know, I would have liked a perfect smooth transition there. It just seems goofy to me, but that's just me. So, maybe there's a different cut of this movie that I saw. I don't know. Maybe some people yeah, I don't remember that part. I thought it perfectly aligned, whichever. But I know there's going to be someone saying hey, the experiment that Sandman did was so and so thing at marshlands of whichever, and I'm like, okay, great. The reason why that the scene was cut this way was because of Sam Raimi telling us in the commentary section that it needed to make okay, sure, all right, cool. He needed to have time with his family. He could have had time whenever, Sandman or not. He could have had time with his family. So Peter is to make his way to Aunt May's new place with her new digs. Also, the Daily Bugle looks vastly different from the other Spider-Man film, because I've recently seen Spider-Man 2, and I think Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2 have the same setup, but then in Spider-Man 3, they drastically changed the setup to where all of a sudden, J. Jonah Jameson has this big glass setup that's kind of way bigger than it was before. He must have transitioned to a different office or something. Must have been a big upgrade for J. Jonah. This company must have had money between Spider-Man 2 and 3, so to speak, to give him a much more wider, bigger room. Because I guess they were going to use that spot a lot more, and maybe they considered it to be too small. Or really, they're just hey, we had to shoot this somewhere else, and that's why this place looks different. Forcibly, we had to do some other place, and so, but this place looks a lot bigger. We had a lot more going on in these scenes, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, so Aunt May is talking to Peter, because Peter is you know what, I think I'm going to propose to Mary Jane. And so Aunt May is well, great, but you do realize that you're going to have to put your wife before yourself, right? And Peter is well, I'm not going to do that. You know, I already saved her life 7 times by now through any number of these other films. I think I've taken and put in her well before me plenty enough times now. So Aunt May, I don't know what you're talking about. So, Aunt May is talking, and of course, again, in Spider-Man 2, where Aunt May is to mention, in the second film, that, man, if Ben were here, because, if I would have just, told him to not drive you that night, we would all be sipping tea together, where in this third one, Aunt May is talking about the day that Ben proposed to Aunt May, that they were waiting till they were ready, and Ben and Aunt May went to the beach, and I'm just wait a minute, how is it that he had the ring on him the whole time? Questions. So Aunt May and Ben decided to go swimming out, and they decided to, I guess, swim so far to this little island of a thing. So they sat out, and so Ben supposedly looking magnificent in his bathing suit, and Aunt May wasn't too shabby either. Ben popped the question to Aunt May, and Aunt May says, "But where's the ring?" And Ben's like, "Uh, oh crap." I must have lost it during the swim. Like, no, Ben had the ring, proposed, and Aunt May, of course, said yes because, like, at first there was a hesitation there, and so Aunt May is to basically give up her ring to Peter because, of course, he doesn't have one. Peter is to hug Aunt May, and but again, Aunt May is to mention like me and Ben would have had our like I think 50-year wedding anniversary, like if he had not have died, because eventually we're gonna get into the whole like Flint Marco thing and how that all attaches to whichever. So Peter is to go off and leave after talking to Aunt May about all this rigmarole. So Peter is to make his way out and just make his way, of course, to eventually out of nowhere, little Goblin Jr. goes and grabs Peter and smacks him up against this building wall. And now we have this fight out where Goblin Jr. is like, "You knew this was coming, Pete." And Peter was like, "I didn't kill your father." And Goblin Jr. is like, "I don't care." It's the fugitive all over again. "I didn't kill my wife. I don't care." Tobey Maguire spadoosh into the waters. But no, Goblin Jr. is to say, "Shut up," and then takes this entire wall and has it topple over where like Peter is kind of in this like loop to try to figure out how he's gonna like get off of uh, this brick wall to try to like make his way and kind of web through here. So we have this cool, amazing like fight sequence uh, where Goblin is going and taking the bombs off of his surfboard and chucking a lot of them. And Peter is like, "God, I hate those things," as he's like flipping his way through the parts of these little like dark alleys. This little like really just like small spot of how they're kind of going through here. So Peter eventually like kind of webs a lot of the pumpkin bombs, but then he eventually takes one and flings it back at Goblin, having one of them like hit him in the chest, so he pulls it out. So, but eventually, what happens is one of the bombs is to explode when it's to like consistently have this all like back and forth kind of thing going on here. So when Goblin is caught off guard, Peter is to take his web and have it on two sides to where Goblin goes and smacks against it, and all of a sudden is to just start smacking into all these pipes and falling over. Peter is to open up Goblin's chest to try to do CPR, and he's like, "God," like, so Peter goes and picks up Goblin, makes his way to the hospital for them to try to revive him with a defibrillator, which I'm amazed that I even remember that word because a lot of times I can't remember the word defibrillator and I don't know why. Cue up the next time that I have to figure out the word defibrillator and I probably won't remember what it is. Just you watch. Or maybe go into any other like review that would probably have a defibrillator in a movie. I'll probably forget what it is. So uh so now Oh God, what is his name? Captain. Oh yeah, it's easy because it's the same name as that one girl. So Captain Stacy is to call both Aunt May and Peter to his office to let him know that the guy that Peter was to kill in the very first movie wasn't the guy that killed Uncle Ben. And Captain Stacy just wanted to boast to Peter, like, haha, you killed the wrong man. You son of a. Peter is like, no, you got the wrong guy. No, no, it has to be the guy that I killed. And Captain Stacy was like, what was that? You killed somebody? Cuffs. Peter is now arrested. The movie is now over. Because Sandman is just going to run amok and be a millionaire. And Goblin is probably going to have to break out Peter so that way he can kill him. So maybe that'll be a way to adjust this story of like, well, like, Peter is going to have to, like, forcibly. What is James Franco's character going to do? Is he going to break into prison so that way he can kill Peter himself and then do so? Anyways. So Peter is to hear that Flint Marko was actually the killer of Ben Parker. And they're like Captain Stacy is to tell Peter, like, it's kind of weird when thinking of this because Captain Stacy was also in Amazing Spider-Man. Now he's in this movie as a much older Captain Stacy. It's weird. So, and also a younger Captain Stacy is dead in Amazing Spider-Man, but he's alive here as a much older man. So weird. So does it make sense? No, it doesn't. No continuity whatsoever between all the franchises. So all of a sudden, Peter is having this story run in his head because Captain Stacy is to say that Flint Marko had confessed in prison about Ben's murder. So Peter is running through this scenario in his head that Flint Marko grabbed Ben Parker and was like, yeah, I'm gonna like drop him onto the ground and shoot him. Just plow, 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 plow. And then Ben's like, I'm gonna die. With great power comes great let's tivity. Anyway. Sad. It's freaking sad. And they have to keep going back to that scene too of how Ben died. Like, just continue to give us an old man moments before his death. Come on. So Peter is now like really upset, like realizing that he killed the wrong man because Peter Parker is a killer. So, and eventually we'll continue to find out that pattern, which like kind of makes me think that there's stories where Peter Parker eventually becomes a villain. And I think this is probably the perfect scenario in this universe where eventually Peter does become a villain. Just because, like, how many seemingly villains has he technically killed? Technically? Or been around while they died? And also, black suit in this movie? Like, he could easily become a villain. Like Peter is just to be like so seduced by eventually becoming a murderer. But I'm also going a little bit too far because, hey, freaking Toby is gonna be in No Way Home, we assume. Because I don't know, it just feels like we're gonna get all the villains in probably No Way Home, but maybe not Garfield or Toby. And we'll probably just maybe get an end credit scene with just them, and that's all we'll get. I want to be more hopeful than that, but like, So Peter is to make his way back to Harry, who, when Peter is to make it to the doctor and say, hey, like, how's Harry doing? And the doctor should have been like, who the f are you? Like, I'm sorry, I'm only going to tell this information to family members. Like, I'm not going to let any Joe Schmo know, like, how somebody's doing. Like, you, go away. So, but this doctor just spills everything. Like, he tells Peter his life story. He tells his credit card number, the numbers to his safe at home, and all kinds of things. But he also says that Harry had been severely gotten a bump on his head to have short-term memory loss, which is convenient for Peter to just slide right into like, hey, buddy, what do you remember? Please let it be anything that happened before Spider-Man 1. And luckily, Harry's like, yeah, that's all I can remember. Spider-Man 1 stuff. And Peter's like, yeah. Because Harry's like, yeah, I don't really much remember anything. Like, yeah, my dad died from something, right? Like, do I have a girlfriend? Do I have a girlfriend now? Am I married? Am I still rich? That's all that matters, Peter. That's all that matters. But then Peter ends up giving like Harry a basketball, and it's like, yeah, basketball. What do I need this for? so, uh, so Peter is to go to his apartment complex, and so MJ is to get a news report having her review, mentioning that her review isn't exactly wonderful, so to speak. It's honestly just quite the opposite. Everyone hated her. Everyone just hated her guts. Everybody was like, MJ sucks! MJ sucks! Like right outside of the theater, they're like, MJ sucks, and like, yeah, that must be some kind of review then. No. So Mary Jane is just so upset by this review. And if I were Peter, I would have been like, why did you even look at the review? Like, I wouldn't even have gotten it any mind. And also, Peter is trying to relate with Mary Jane, where it's like, hey, like when I was Spider-Man, I used to get this kind of stuff all the time. Like, I would always get, like, J. Jonah Jameson saying, well, I'm a menace, and that I should, like, hang it up, and that, like, I used to get that crap all the time. But now, like, all of a sudden, things have turned to where we get, like, magazines saying, like, why New York loves Spider-Man and all kinds of stuff. Like, everyone has now, like, turned the other way with Spider-Man, with the exclusion of probably J. Jonah Jameson, but everyone else is just like, but hey, man, we love Spider-Man. But J. Jonah Jameson is like, well, I want to get him in the cookie jar. I want to see his hand being dipped in there, and I want to see him do some wrongdoings. Eddie Brock, get on that. Get all up in that. So, uh, so Peter is trying to relate to Mary Jane about a bad review, technically. But Mary Jane is just like, I don't want to hear this from you. Like, and then all of a sudden, Peter has to go and save the day again. And then Peter is just like, well, go get him, Tiger. Like in the second one. And Mary Jane is like, how about you just go away? Don't go get him. Just, like, never come back. So, that transitions us to having Peter eventually forcibly going and having this crane that seems to be malfunctioning, and all of a sudden this crane ends up going through like some building that coincidentally has Gwen Stacy, who's modeling a copier for whatever reason. Is anybody confused about that scene where it's like, why is she modeling either on top of or by a copier? seems weird, but I don't know. What do I know? So, so this crane goes through this building. So we start to see Gwen Stacy sliding down and just holding on for dear life. And so we have Captain Stacy, and all of a sudden Eddie Brock is to appear, and he's like, "Oh man, like that looks like Gwen Stacy with his camera just all over the place." And so Captain Stacy is like, "Who are you?" And Eddie's like, "Well, I'm Edward Brock Jr. or whatever, like something like that." So, and I'm also dating your daughter. To her, Captain Stacy is like, "I have a gun. I have one. Not on me, but I have one. It's in my car. Give me a second." Gwen Stacy is, of course, hanging on. So Peter comes swinging into action, going and grabbing all these people, eventually grabbing Gwen, swinging his way to her safety. Eddie makes his way to start taking pictures of Spider-Man. Eddie is to mention that it's like, "Hey, I'm your new reporter," and Spider-Man's like, "Well, hey, they got a guy," and Edward is like, "Well," Eddie's like, "No offense, but like the other guy, like he used to make you look chunky, like he used to make you look bloated, like you know what, like I'm your new guy," and so that's when Spider-Man is like, okay," so he like flies off. So now we have the moment where Peter is to, of course, go into the Daily Bugle, see what the heck is going on. And so now Edward Brock Jr. is to try to, one, give photos of Spider-Man to J. Jonah and just say, like, "Hey, like, sir, I want a job. Like, all this freelance stuff is great, but I want a job." But Peter comes in, gives J. Jonah another picture that looks a little better. And Eddie's like, "How did you get that picture?" And Peter was like, "Well, I was up a flagpole. It was a difficult shot, but I got it." It's like, "Yeah, I don't think so." But yeah, so they run with, of course, Peter's picture. It's a lot better. So eventually that just is starting this rivalry. So J. Jonah is to say, like, "Well, okay, like I have a new like job going on here. So how about either one of you have a picture of Spider-Man in the cookie jar?" We also have this really funny spot where or Betty is telling J. Jonah Jameson about his medication and about his wife calling. And of course, we have his desk that shakes every time because of a huge vibration of things when he used to get paged by Brand. Which I'm like, okay, why do they need to have like this juggling of things? Like, I guess it might have just been a joke that they were just going to use this little portion of time, which I guess it could be funny. Like, I think the very first time that I saw that, I was like, yeah, that is kind of a funny spot. But like to me, like I think that's probably a thing that I can also remember about this movie is about the the Jameson like desk shaking. Like, oh, this is the desk shaking Spider-Man movie. So pushing on. So Peter is to make his way out. We get a Stanley cameo in this movie, which is like where he's like, "Nuff said," and then like freaking just walks away like a badass. Freaking Stanley could have been like, "Foot, mother, foot." "Nuff said, Excelsior," like, and then left. Like, did it could have like I think Stanley should have done that. I think Stanley should have been the one dancing in this film, or at some point should have been like, "Yeah, Excelsior." That would have been a cool spot. That would have been funny. if all of a sudden Peter is to all of a sudden dance it out, and then all of a sudden, like, Stanley, like, comes out of, like, yeah, what is this? What is this going on? That would have been a funny spot, but anyways, pushing on. So, Peter is to make his way to Harry's and bizarrely give him this basketball. So, all of a sudden, they're playing basketball in Harry's mansion, apartment, place thing. Harry is asking Bernard if he has like a woman in line, like basically if Harry is to have a girlfriend, and Bernard is just like, like I've seen a lot of bills for like $5,000 escorts, but I don't know if you have any dates. We can't do that in this movie, but we could have. And so Peter and Harry are bouncing basketballs. All of a sudden, Harry is to grab the basketball and grab this vase or this vase that is falling. Harry's like, wow, I still got the moves. And Peter's like, yeah, I guess so. What other kind of, like, moves do you have, Harry? So that way I can strategically write them down. So that way, when eventually you get your memory back, I can know an easy way to defeat you. I'm also going to go behind this mirrored door that you have here to just check some things out. And if something goes missing, just don't think about it. So Mary Jane is to make her way to the stage and is to immediately find out that she's being replaced. Someone else is saying that they're wonderful. And Mary Jane is like, what the fuck? Like, you guys are... And they're like, oh, crap. Oh, yeah, we completely forgot to tell you. You're fired. We're just gonna obviously tell you now that you're getting replaced. And how poorly garbage of a timing that was for you to find that out. Because everyone just hated you. Then why, like... Why did you, like... Because, like, for acting stuff, you have to go through a number of hoops and auditions and whatever to eventually get the part, but I guess if people just sour on you, it's just like, dude, we're just gonna freaking replace you. Like, I know for me, when, like, because, like, I did, like, auditions for stuff when I was in high school, because I did some plays, because, like, I had nothing better to do in my senior year, because I was freaking, like, I couldn't do, like, football or sports anymore, because I didn't have the best knees. So I did the only thing that I could do after school, which was really just do plays. So I just auditioned for those. And you get a couple auditions, and then you're like, and then they're like, yeah, no. Or, yeah, we can just use you in the background somewhere. Like, yeah, we'll just, like, luckily we had this gigantic cast that you're just going to be somewhere in there. But anyways, so... So, so, pushing on now. We have a spot where Sandman is just kind of walking through town, and some police officers had spotted Sandman, which is to lead us to have Peter jump into action, become Spider-Man, and try to fight off Sandman. And eventually, while MJ is to leave the stage, all of a sudden she's to see everyone clapping, and she's like, oh, that's for me? No, it's for Spider-Man. Like, sucks to be you. And Mary Jane's like, why can't I be a celebrity in this couple? Because if anything, like, Spider-Man 2, like, MJ was actually the celebrity of things, and Peter was just this person that everyone just, like, you're a menace, and everyone hated him. Now, like, the shoe is on the opposite foot, and MJ is now just like, I want to be the celebrity in this couple between me and Peter. Like, maybe I should break up with him, because that guy. So, uh, so Sandman is to trying to break into this armored car. Peter is to try to take him down. Try to just, as usual, like punch through a villain like he always does to find out that his hand is through this guy's chest, where he's like, yeah, that's gonna be a little bit difficult. So Peter ends up getting freaking clocked. There's this back and forth thing going on there. But eventually, Sandman is to get away. Peter is to sling off and to like try to like take off his mask and take off his boot to dump all the sand off. And he's like, "Where do they get these guys? Like, where? Like, how do like these guys just get harder and harder? Freaking, it's ridiculous." So that just transitions us to Peter eventually wanting to pop the question at this restaurante, which I guess is some French restaurant, where Bruce Campbell is back yet again to be not an usher this time around, but he is to be this guy who's like, yeah, I am the French. It's like, okay. Like, I am French and we are romantic. Like, yeah, like that's what's cool about French people. It's like freaking awesome. Good, yeah, cool. French people are cool. So Bruce Campbell is to hear that Peter is to put this champagne glass and have the ring in it, and Bruce is just like, wow, that's just so original, Peter. That's so original. You couldn't have come up with anything else? How many times has anybody like put rings in food or champagne things? I was just waiting for when they were to put the ring out. Frickin' Mary Jane like gulps the whole thing down because she's had a hard day, chokes on the ring, and then all of a sudden, or she just completely eats the ring. Peter is just like, ah. I was waiting for that moment to happen where MJ doesn't choke on the ring. She just easily swallows it while she drinks it. And then Peter is just like, ah. Well, I guess we're going to be married now because the ring is inside of you, inside of your stomach. So, anyways, pushing on. So, Peter, MJ at this establishment. Let me pause here for a reset for a second. So, coincidentally, I guess we should cover the key to the city thing, because Peter is to go and get a key to the city. I think that was also the point where, because I might have missed a part there, might have missed a step. Because Gwen Stacy was to give Peter the key to the city because she was saved by him. Peter goes slinging out there, gets a key to the city. He's upside down. Gwen Stacy and him kiss, and he's just like this, like upside down, just like, yeah, like, because everybody is telling Gwen to kiss Spider-Man, and Spider-Man is like, yeah, just lay one on me, like they'll love it. But we have the one kid who's like, no, Spider-Man, no. He's like, ew, cooties. So like everyone else is saying kiss him, but the one kid is like, no. So they do it because it's a publicity stunt, and so Spider-Man gets to the key to the city, and so Spider-Man is like, dude, I'm gonna be freaking using this. Anything close to me? Not anymore. I'm coming. I'm going to take this key, and like Subway or God, was a good restaurant, good enough restaurant. McDonald's, you're gonna be opening up late tonight. I need Big Macs. Yeah, so now we got that covered because I was like, oh no, the whole picture thing is going to come up. Because Gwen Stacy's to make her way to Peter and ask Peter, like, hey, like you're here, what a coincidence. Like, Peter, like, uh, if you have a picture of me and Spider Man kissing, just let me know. So that way you can give me like the shot, so like I can like hang it up somewhere because Gwen Stacy has this like I don't know what it was, but like when they had this whole like Gwen Stacy thing here, but I just don't think they used that character good enough. But maybe there was a whole thing to have been had, but maybe they couldn't pull it off. I don't know, but maybe there was something else there for Gwen Stacy to do, but they just didn't go along with it. So, uh, so all of a sudden, Mary Jane is just wanting to figure out a way to just break up with Peter, and so Gwen Stacy is a way to do it. Because Mary Jane is like, hey, like her hands are all over, like her polished hands are all over you, and like you have a class with her, and she kissed Spider Man. I thought that was our kiss. And Peter is like, what? Like I wasn't even thinking about her. She's just a girl in my class, Mary Jane. And Mary Jane's like, you know what? No, like I'm freaking like this is like I can't trust you because like you're kissing other people with the mask on. Like I think it's over. I think we're done. So MJ's to walk off. All of a sudden, the people are coming with the glass. Guys doing the wonderful song. I'm like, man, do they really overuse that song in this movie? But it is what it is. So Peter gets the ring out of the glass and is to make his way home all alone now, sadly, boohoo. So we have spots where Peter is to also talk to Mr. Dickovich and Ursula in this movie, which was kind of cool to have that, like, those characters come back. I know Dickovich is like a big thing with the whole Bully Maguire thing where he's like, rent. I've seen several of those videos where it's all about like the rent or it's black suit emo Peter Parker a lot. Which those videos are really fun to watch, but also like of course like there's a lot of people that are just like, yeah, this doesn't look like the best CG and blah blah. It doesn't look perfectly like connected and whatever, and everybody has their opinion, and that's perfectly fine. Because it's hard to do freaking videos and try to make them like look different, or maybe people like the whole fact that it doesn't look. I don't know. Anyways, so Peter goes into his apartment to go and get sleep, but also to have the the station on to see if Flint Marco is to eventually show himself so Peter can come and get or go after him. So Peter goes and rests with basically the Spider-Man suit on at all times. Like, wait a minute. So like this the Spider-Man suit we already have remembered from Spider-Man 2 where Peter is to say that the Spider-Man suit is itchy and it rides up in the crotch, but he's going to go ahead and sleep in that? Okay. So Peter sleeps in the Spider-Man suit, and that's when we get the the black suit. The symbiote to go all up in Peter. And so all of a sudden, Peter is to be, I guess, have blacked out because I guess the suit had taken control. But I'm like, wait a minute. So, like, shouldn't immediately, like, Peter have just said, like, well, wait a minute. Like, how is it that I just weirdly just got here all of a sudden without me having the complete control of this? But, like, so Peter is going and looking at himself and he's like, oh, black, this looks cool. So Peter is all of a sudden like flexing his muscles, uh, like feeling stronger, feeling like he can do a lot more, going on and like eventually just kind of like feeling this whole thing out. He takes off the mask. It's like, this is great. So transitioning us on to there being a Flint Marko sighting. So Peter is to eventually follow Flint Marko down this seemingly subway station or the sewer location. So Flint is just kind of walking through the tunnel, and Peter is just kind of on the very top of this whole thing, kind of doing his spider crawl. So eventually, Peter is just like, "Oh, hey, buddy! Like, freaking, like, you remember Ben Parker?" And Sandman is like, "Well, what's it to you?" And Peter's like, "Everything." Takes a freaking web, kicks Sandman to just kind of like I think this was like right around this. Yeah, I think this has to be like a subway station. Like it looks like the weirdest subway station because it looks much more like a sewer. Um, like this is the weirdest looking subway station, but what do I know? It looks so much like a sewer, and plus also like I would be so concerned of the build of all this stuff. But what do I know? So Peter is to fight Sandman, and he's doing a pretty good. Peter's do a really good job shoving this half guy's face into a subway while it's going by, having his face just like starting to more and more cut off. But Sandman like reforms his face, so Peter's trying all these kind of tactics to eventually take this character out, but eventually that leads to having Flint by this massive drain of sorts, where Peter is to all of a sudden have this big, huge pipe that he's to be able to pull apart to all of a sudden have this water going pew, 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 pew with all these bolts that were to be attached to this thing. And then all of a sudden we have this bizarrish time where Sandman is to have like the camera move with the pew pew kind of sounds, and he's like poo poo poo. So all this water comes smashing into Sandman. We are to assume that he's dead. Peter's like, good riddance. So we also get a spot in this movie where Peter is to tell Aunt May that he had killed the man that had gotten Ben. And Aunt May is just kind of upset about that. But Peter's like, well, I thought you'd be happy. Like, I murdered him. I murdered the guy. I got to him. He's dead now. So... But now we have, like, emo Peter. So Peter is to make it to his apartment, and Mr. Dickovich is there. And he's like, rent? Peter's like, you'll get your rent when you fix this door. Because we have these goofy spots where, like, this door is just so hard to freaking get open. It's ridiculous. We have Ursula, like, desperately trying to get this door open. And she's having a really hefty, tough time. But there's this spot where Peter was to call Mary Jane, and that's the first spot with Mr. Dickovich and Ursula. And Dickovich is like, well, like, what is there to say? You just tell her you're a good man, she's a good woman. It should be simple. So he walks off. And there's a spot where Peter is to uh, try and call Mary Jane, leave a message. Ursula comes back to Peter's like, "Hey, Mary Jane is to call you back." Uh, but I think we'll get to that in a little bit later. So, but yeah, but there's also a spot of the fix it god dang door, where Dickovich is just like, yeah, he must be in trouble because he's a nice boy. So, uh, so pushing on, like the next big spot is that Harry is to spend time with Mary Jane, because when Harry and Mary Jane are at the key to the city thing, Harry's to mention it's like, well, hey, once I get a bump on the head, as free as a bird. And MJ is like, hey, bump me on the head. And so Harry goes, boop. So MJ only told Harry that she was let go of the play. Like, she never told Peter about it. And Harry was just like, well, hey, like, I have a play that I wrote when I was like in 12th grade or something. So, hey, maybe you can try that out. So that leads to having both Harry and MJ now going and cooking up some omelet, which of course Harry ruins like a ruiner of omelets. But MJ was like, well, maybe we can just use part of this scene. Like, maybe we can just use a little sliver of this scene to make it look like you did something good. So MJ is reading Harry's script, and like, I guess it's really good because MJ's like, man, this is really good. And Harry's like, I know, right? Anyways, so eventually this just leads to all of a sudden MJ just kissing Harry, and it's like, whoa. Like, I guess technically MJ and Peter are broken up. Like, Peter tries to call MJ and tells her that he loves her, but like, he gets nothing. Just straight up nothing. So, this transitions to us to eventually, after all that happened, all of a sudden, Harry's getting his memory back. He used to look at the portrait of his father, and so all of a sudden everything is to come back to him. He's seeing his father in the mirror again, and now we get the spot of Willem Dafoe telling us, like, attack his heart. Make him wish that he make him wish he was dead. Attack his heart. Do it. Just go at it, Harry. So Harry is to sneak into MJ's place, grabbing her, which I think when I saw this in the theater originally, I think I did jump at that part because it wasn't like expected. Like, I think there might have been some parts in the very original Spider-Man movie where I did probably jump just because of like, what the heck? Like, all of a sudden Green Goblin is rushing to the screen. I'm like, what's going on here? So, but yeah, so Harry is to grab in Goblin attire, grab MJ and say, you need to do something for me. Like, do it. So MJ calls Peter to say, like, hey, like, we need to speak. So Peter's just like, yeah, like, maybe this will be the time where I propose to her, or maybe something's gonna just, like, she's gonna tell me that, like, she really does love me, and like, I can propose and everything will work out. Let me go and get flowers. Oh, there was also the one spot where Peter was to, during the goblin fight, consistently have to try to grab that ring that was consistently out of his grasp, where he had to like web for it and all kinds of things to make sure that it doesn't hit the ground. How is it that Peter can find this ring in midair? That just seems like a 1 in a million kind of scenario, where Peter must have eyes like a hawk or something, that is just to minutely just see a ring just dancing in midair. That just seemed wild to me. but like CG and all kinds of stuff. So Peter makes his way to Mary Jane at this one little, I think, bridge. Mary Jane is to tell Peter, it's like, well, you're not there for me. And Peter is like, well, wait, what? Like, what about Spider-Man 1 and 2? Like, I was there. I was saving your life. I was saving your life there, Mary Jane. But yeah, so MJ is like, this is the end. This is over. We're done. And then Peter's like, like his face is just like, oh. It's like, but what? So, like, Peter was just like, I was gonna propose. I was gonna we're gonna, like, I love you, Mary Jane. And MJ is like, I'm deucing. I'm out. So Mary Jane is like, there's someone else. So Peter all of a sudden is to try to get comfort from Harry. And Harry's too busy eating some pie and saying, oh, it's so good. So good. Oh, so good. So Peter goes to talk to Harry. And Harry then confesses, it's like, well, I just want to let you know, Peter, like, MJ does have another man, and it's me. Like, me and her just kissed it out, and just, yeah, like sparks were flying. Like, it just happened, Peter. So all of a sudden, that just leads Peter to just like leave. But then all of a sudden, like, Peter should just kind of walk out. Then he's to turn back, look at Harry, and Harry's like, ah! And Peter's like, oh. Because the pie is so good. So Harry vanishes, and then all of a sudden, Peter is like, Goblin Jr., I'm going to go and get him. So Harry, of course, is to say, well, I'm going to put back on the Spider-Man suit, the black suit, and go after Harry. So Peter confronts Harry, and we find out that actually Harry is to actually have like the goblin gear underneath his clothes, because all of a sudden we see like these spikes that come out of Harry's arm. So we get this back and forth thing where Harry, of course, is like, pooh-hoo, you killed my father. And Peter is like, well, yeah, so what? So, like, we get where Peter is to tell Harry that his father was kind of just disappointed at him, that, like, he, like, all the kind of the most hurtful things that they could say. Harry's to mention how Peter had protected him in school, but now, like, he's not going to protect him anymore. So this fight is to go on and on and on, breaking through windows, all kinds of stuff. So eventually they break through the secret room, and so again, Harry is to have bomb, and we get, of course, this really fun spot where Peter is like, oh, are you going to cry, Goblin Jr.? So Harry tosses pumpkin bomb. Peter webs pumpkin bomb to fall back into Harry to detonate and just explode half of Harry's face. So, and then Peter leaves without any kind of remorse of going back and checking on Harry or whatever. He's like, dude, I'm freaking done with like, I'm freaking done trying to like hospitalize this guy, and he eventually just comes back after me anyways. Like, I'm done with this. Like, if he's dead, he's dead, whatever. So all of a sudden, the next thing is that Eddie Brock is to have this this photo of Spider-Man, because Eddie Brock was to see Spider-Man going to get to Flint Marko in this subway station, and Eddie is to say like, well, hey, like I'm gonna be your new like photographer now. Like, give me some web action. And so Spider-Man webs Eddie's camera, breaks it, and is like, see you, chump. Freaking leaves. So Eddie is to just kind of take all these photos. All of a sudden, Eddie has this photo of Spider-Man who is taking money and running off supposedly somewhere in this photo. Peter is to look at it and it's like, wow, that looks a little familiar. Like, maybe you should check your sources next time around. So Peter is to find the exact same photo that Eddie had stolen this from. And Eddie is just like, hey, like, don't do this. I'll lose my job. I'll lose everything. And Peter is like, well, if you want forgiveness, find religion. And so Robbie is like, hey, what's going on? Peter is to mention that, hey, like, this photo is a fake. Here you go. Check your sources next time. So J. Jonah is to get the picture and to see, like, yeah, it is a fake. So J. Jonah fires Eddie, and Robbie's to mention, like, we're going to have to write a retraction now, right? J. Jonah's like, dude, I haven't done a retraction in, like, a number of years. But it's like, well, sucks to be you. You have to do one. So there's just a thing that says, sorry, Spidey, the photo was a fake. That sucks. So that just leads Peter to eventually having his dance sequence where he's like, get on up. So, like, Peter is on top of the world, putting out photos of Spider-Man to J. Jonah, and I'm gonna have to probably slap a charge on this. So J. Jonah is to say, like, okay, we'll do the normal fee, and Peter's just like, no, like, I want the staff job, and I want double the pay. And J. Jonah Jameson's like, huh? Like, since when do you have a backbone, Parker? So Peter is to do his little dance with the get on up. So Peter is finger banging everybody with his hands. So getting new threads, getting these new cool suits and whatever, but still having emo hair. So eventually Sandman is to emerge because you can't take a Sandman down, evidently. So that, of course, leads us into, now since Mary Jane has dumped Peter, Peter is going to get his revenge because of Black Suit. Peter is to go and is to take Gwen Stacy to Mary Jane's new job, where she's a waitress / singer at some jazz club. So Peter is to go here in this jazz club. Gwen Stacy is to spot Mary Jane. It's like, hey, like, Mary Jane's here. It's like, do you want to leave? And Peter's like, no, I think I'll be fine because I'm going to go and get my revenge, weirdly enough. Because I guess he's just a scorned lover. So all of a sudden now we have Peter Parker, I guess because of the symbiote, he has the ability to play the piano really well for some freaking reason. He's like, and like MJ is like, where is that coming from? All of a sudden it's coming from Peter. And so all of a sudden, like, Peter has learned all his dancing skills of stuff that comes out of nowhere because, I guess, symbiote. Where did Peter pick all this up? Is it just the Spider-Man powers that are just giving him this dancing talent of sorts? Like, man, when this symbiote gets a hold of people, man, like, this symbiote just can't stop dancing. I don't know what it is. I don't know where they got this from. The whole, like, symbiote thing where he has to dance around, but I guess it is what it is. So, uh, let's get further into this. So, uh, Peter eventually gets into a bar fight with some of the uh, security guys. He takes him out. Eventually clocks Mary Jane by accident. Uh, Gwen Stacy also runs off because she realizes what Peter was trying to do. Mary Jane was asking Peter, like, who are you? And he's like, I don't know. So Peter goes off to go to this church because Big Huge Bell to try to pull off the black suit. All of a sudden, Brock is coincidentally at the exact same church praying to God to be like, could you just kill Peter Parker? All of a sudden, bells are ringing. All of a sudden, Brock is weirdly hearing some screaming because Peter is trying to rip off the symbiote suit from his clothes. So, and all of a sudden, this symbiote dips into Brock, and so all of a sudden, Brock is like, ah. So, transitioning now, Sandman kind of walking throughout the place. Venom is like, hey, Sandman, like, it looks like you want a piece of Spider-Man 2. It's like, well, like, same boat here. Are you interested in kind of teaming up? So, transition us to, of course, Venom is to go and grab MJ, and that's to lead to now this whole thing where Sandman is to block any of the police officers from getting to Mary Jane to save her. Venom is to web a sign that say, hey, like, Spider-Man, like, come get her if you can, or something like that, or like some kind of like weird thing of just like come and get me if you can, or something, some weird like that. So MJ or Peter is to realize that he's outnumbered, so immediately he ends up going to Harry for help and saying like, hey, like, she needs us. And Harry is just like, no, like, I'm not going to team up with you. Like, go away. So Peter is like, well, okay, I guess I'm going to have to go and try to fight these people out. So Peter leaves. All of a sudden, Bernard has a conversation with Harry mentioning that, like, Osborn had died via his own hands, his own glider. So, like, Bernard is trying to make Harry realize that Bernard loves him, but also his friends love him, and that you should let the death of your father just go and, like, just go off to do whatever you want instead of having this, like, this vendetta that, like, really is to, like, why are you doing this? So now we have kind of Peter is making his way trying to fight off both Sandman and Venom, but Peter eventually makes it to where Mary Jane is, and that is to lead Venom to grab MJ and like, hey, my spider sense is tingling, if you know what I mean. So both Venom and Peter are fighting it out. Venom, of course, or Brock is to tell Peter, it's like, that, like, that he is going to take down Peter because of what he has all done to Eddie. So, but yeah, so this eventually, like, ends with like, Peter eventually falling onto the ground because he tries to web, but he ends up smacking onto the ground. All of a sudden, Sandman is to arrive to go and try to take Peter out. Peter is caught off guard. and so like eventually it just gets where this team up is to work in the favor of Spider or of Venom and Sandman, because eventually Venom is to use his web to stick Peter to this God, what is it? This slab of thing, and Sandman is just consistently just forearm like smash Peter, and like this was like when I watched this originally in theaters, like oh my God, this part is so interesting, especially with the newscaster's delivery. It's like the brutality of it. It's just I don't think he can stand much more. So that is, of course, where the spot where all of a sudden Goblin comes in, tosses his bomb into Sandman. Sandman goes down. So now Harry and Peter are teaming up. They like Peter is on top of Harry's glider, and they're tag teaming and they're tossing one another. And go get him, buddy! Like, yeah, like, it's like, and Harry's telling Peter, hold on, and Peter's like, to what? But we have like Harry saying like, well, hey man, I'm here, and Peter's like, well, a couple minutes would have been good too, and Harry's like, well, like what do you do? Like, so all of a sudden, Goblin is to be faced with Sandman, and Peter is to be faced with Venom, and so like they're at odds. They're just like, hey, I could use a little help right here. It's like, hey, me too. It's like, so they team up. So eventually this lands us to have Goblin consistently trying to take Sandman out with all kinds of his bombs and stuff like that. So Peter is to eventually try and take Venom out. But what eventually happens is Venom is to eventually take Goblin's glider and going and trying to stab the glider into Peter. All of a sudden, Goblin is to walk in the way and he gets stabbed instead. So we just see the spot where Harry is to basically just die at this point. So now Peter needs to come up with a way to beat Venom. So, of course, we get this spot where Peter is to put all these like metal rungs together to make these vibrations to just tick off Venom. And then, of course, when Venom and Eddie are to separate, Toby webs it, grabs Eddie. All of a sudden, the Venom symbiote is kind of like building up high over these little bars. Peter smacks the rods together to create a vibration, which minimizes Venom. So Peter grabs a Goblin bomb, tosses it in there, and all of a sudden Eddie runs like, what are you doing? And he runs into the Venom symbiote to try to like keep the symbiote with him. And Toby's like, oh my God. So Eddie and symbiote are to die, so we're to believe. Like, we could have had a moment where all of a sudden, like, Eddie could have came back in sequel if there ever was to be one, just to, like, confirm his death or not. So, because not everybody assumed that Eddie was dead, because there's also a Venom movie, so, anyways, but it's not the same continuity. So, now Sandman is to go to Peter and not to attack him. Sandman is just to be like, well, like, I didn't want this. Like, so Sandman is to actually tell Peter what actually really happened. That the gun in Sandman's hand just went off by accident, because Sandman was to try to take Ben's car. Ben told him to put down the gun. Sandman didn't want to, or Sandman was just kind of like, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. all of a sudden, Sandman's other goon comes out running, and Sandman, who ended up getting surprised by that, all of a sudden the gun goes off into uh, Ben's hands, and so or in Sandman's hands, I mean. So Sandman goes and like places Ben uh, like gently down to the ground, but then Flint ends up just running off. Flint is to mention that's like, hey, like my daughter was sick. That's why I've done the things that I've done. And I know what I did uh, was a horrible thing to you, and that like there's nothing that I can do to really like take it back. So, but eventually, like Flint is to eventually get the forgiveness from Peter, and then Sandman is to sand his way off. So Peter is now go and like try to have his last moments with Harry, and eventually cry for his loss, of course. So that just transitions us to towards the very end of this to have Peter go off to Mary Jane's jazz club to eventually dance with her, and that's how this movie is to just kind of fizzle off. So, man, that took a while to get all that out. I think man, that sucked because I think this took about the exact same time the movie was. There's a lot in this movie. There's a whole lot, and I probably missed a ton too. So I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.